Okay, so one of the things that we did for a T-pose character, and there's a difference between a T-pose and an A-pose character, is we set up all of our controls to begin with, and we created all of our joint chains so that we're pretty much ready to set up our IK handles and then create our IK FK switch and do all of our constraints. Before we do that, there's something that has to be done, and it doesn't necessarily need to be done for T-pose, but we're going to do it anyway. And then we have to do it for the A-pose characters. So I'm going to hide these first and go back over how to create your controls. And the way I'm going to do that here is this. So start with a polygon shape, so just a simple cube. And I'm going to snap that here. This time I'm going to snap it to my wrist, or my palm. So like that. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so it comes out as far as the wrist goes. And then I'm going to hit my vertex points here. And I'm going to shrink these down like that. So I have this object. Ooh, I don't want to do that. And then I'm going to go back to my object mode. And without having wireframe on shaded, I'm going to go ahead and start creating a curve. So I'm going to go under my where is that sucker? Modeling. What am I looking for? Curves.
Wouldn't it be under rigging?
To create curves, rigging. It's under create, yeah. Been up for a couple hours, guys, so bear with me. Yeah, create curve tool. Make sure that when we are doing that, we are set to linear. Mine had reset to cubic, but we want to reset to linear. And then multiple knots. And so this is essentially a review. Then I'm going to hit V, and I'm going to draw over these. And I'm going to move around when I do this. So, and you could keep going on this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to press G and then add another set. So I'm going to start here and draw these lines this way. Like that. And then one more time, just to create this curve. So with that done and my template ready to go, I'm going to delete my outer box, make sure that my curve is set, and I actually have this extra piece here, so I'm going to go to Control Vertex, select, make sure my joints aren't selectable, turn that off, and just delete that part of the curve. So with that set, you'll notice I have these several pieces for this curve. In order to make this one box, and this is for, you're going to do this with your FK IK switch too, I need to go under Display, Shapes, and that allows me to see my curve and my shape. And what I need to do is move the shapes from this section into this one object. So I don't select the curve shape on the curve I want it to be a part of. I select the curve itself, and then in my mail script I type in parent, which I got to spell parent correctly, -R-S, and hit enter, and that moves the shapes from this curve into the actual curve set. And then I can just delete these and rename this wrist left control. So with that set, there's actually something else that I need to do if I have an A pose. I'm going to turn off my shapes. If I have an A pose, I'm going to run into the problem where when I select this object, it's going to have to be moved. So let's modify, center my pivot, and actually move my pivot first to my wrist. But this is going to have to be moved in order to line up with the position of my object. So in order to line up with the position of my character's hands, I'd have to move this down. Now, the problem is that if my character's in an A pose, and let's say even for my T pose I want to do this, I want this to just kind of follow this down a little bit more and move these around. This is going to inherit some translates and transforms and some rotations that I don't want, because our control needs to be zeroed out so that when we return and animate, it animates this way. We also need to be able to rotate from this origin position so that if, and I'm going to click on my rotate tool so you can see what's going on. If I change my orientation from object to gimbal, I lose this control, and you can see how I've got it straight up and down, that I can move in these axes and only these axes. So if it says rotate X, Y, and Z, as I move through this, I've got that motion, and I can zero it out, and it's fine. The problem comes that if I have an A pose, my control is already inheriting some form of transformation like this. And then if I'm in object space and I'm trying to rotate, when I move, it has all of this 3-at-once rotation, which I don't want. So I'm going to zero these out, and then what I need to do is create a null object. So I'm just going to quickly group it to itself, and I'm going to name this wrist left null. And this group, kind of modify and center my pivot, and then insert this back to my wrist control. This group is what I can actually take and move into position. So I'm going to center this out a little bit, and maybe move that down so it encompasses the hand a little bit more, and then put that in place. And then I don't need to do anything with this. Once this is done, I can take all of these objects here, and I can lock selected, or even lock and hide selected, so that these are gone. And this becomes a null object. What that means is, now that I've got that set, when I select this, you can see my rotation. If I select gimbal, you see how that goes straight in this, and it inherits this position. But if I switch back to object, that shifts. So if you watch this line here, when I switch back and forth these two, so gimbal and object switches back and forth. Now, if I select this control in this position and I select my object, you can see I've got zeroed out translations and rotations. When I select to gimbal, it stays the same. And the reason that it stays the same is that it maintains my object-based orientation, because the null object is the one that carries those transitions and those translations. So if you have this, what you probably want to do is move your objects, move these objects here, or create new ones, and put them in place by creating a null object, and then replace all of your controls. You'll do that for all of these. So does that make sense for people who have an A pose? Okay, so as I said, the same thing is going to happen for the T pose, and I'm going to reopen these now so that you can see them. So for the T pose, 1 second while the door closes. For the T pose on this, I've got everything ready to go, and I've got my control set. I need to convert these into null objects as well. So in order to do that, for all of them, I'm going to go through and select each one and group it to itself, and then position them the way I want, so that any kind of original positioning that's in here is maintained. So actually, I'm going to undo this since I want to keep my hand position from what I just did. And I'm going to move that in to my wrist here. So this is my IK control. That's it for the name. And then I can actually get rid of this control. But I'm going to go back through and delete my right side and create null objects for all of my controls here. So it's just a little bit easier to go through and delete these and then redo them once we have our null objects. So I'm just going to do that like that. And then select each one and start creating a group for each. Just like that. And for each group, I'm going to go through this, and this is what me, left, null, which is inside here. Actually, I'm going to put the name on this too, fk me null. So I'm going to copy and paste this and go foot, left, null. And Lauren is probably going to rename and go through the feet as well when she's back. But this is what we're doing right now, is creating null groups for all of our controls so that the APOS students can actually finish their rig and maintain the transformations and have a zeroed out rig. Otherwise, it's going to cause problems for your animator. So your animator is going to hate you if you don't do this, and your rig will just generally not work very well as it goes through. So as I go through and I make these changes, even on my FKIK switch, I have a null object for all of them. I need to adjust the pivot points for each to match. So the nulls go in here. This is the risk group I'm actually going to delete because I'm keeping this one. And as you finish each of your nulls, you need to make sure that once your stuff is set and your poses and positions are finished, you lock and hide each of these. So my last one here, I think. So I have all of these set. I can actually select each of these now, go into and select all of these objects, and I right click to bring up this menu in my channel box, and I go back down here and I hit lock and hide selected. So now each one of these has no attributes that I can work with, but the controls themselves still have zeroed out attributes. Now, the reason that you end up having to redo these for people who have APOS characters is that you already have transformations that are in here, and you'll inherit those transformations if you froze your transformations. So if you move this into a position like this to match where your hand actually is posed, and you have these rotations here, when you froze the transformations, you reset the angle and position on this so it doesn't actually zero out on this move. So what we actually want is for this to be 0 and have your null group inherit all of those transformations. And then when we zero them out, you'll never key on them. You'll just access these. So once you have that done, and I have this group here for my controls, I'm going to mark this group as left controls for my transfer, so left _ controls. And this entire group I'm going to duplicate and create a -1 with. So that gives me my nulls. The problem here is that I've just done this transformation and transition, and it's this group here that I have to deal with. So I actually have to show everything again before I freeze these, remove these. So I need to go into my channels, my attribute editor here. Actually, no, wait. Windows, general editors, channel control. And because I had locked these, I'm going back into my channel control. I'm going to move these back. And by these, I mean my rotate X, Y, and Z, my scale X, Y, and Z, my visibility, and my translate X, Y, and Z. And I needed to move these back to keyable for a reason, so that when I hit this as a group and do modify freeze transformations, one of my nulls is still locked. So actually I have to unlock these two. So now that they're back, I can right click on them and unlock selected. Hopefully this isn't going to mess anything up. So select this, modify, freeze transformations. These are zeroed out, but my IK control should still have this position. So let's see if that inherits anything. Let's go back a step. Yeah, freezing the transformation doesn't work. So freezing the transforms on this actually creates a problem. So we can't actually duplicate these. We have to make new ones. So for A pose people, you will have to make a new set. Because if you freeze the transformations on this null for this group, you end up losing the orientation of this object. So you can't do that. You'll have to make a new set. So any questions on that?
So we should delete what we have.
Yes. Just for the arms. So I'm going to pause this for a minute and see if there might be a better way to do some of this, and I'll be back. I'm going to resume here. Because I think I've got a solution that's going to work for you to be able to create your controls before you move them into place. So I think my Maya just locked up on me. Essentially what I'm going to have you guys do, come on Maya, right here, see how I've already got my control set built in a T-pose. If A-pose people do the same thing here and build their controls flat like this, and so that they don't have any transformations, and so that their rotations that are on here are based on the origin and where they want, so that when they rotate and they move on their origin points, and so that these are aligned correctly with them. When they move that and mirror these to the left and right, this will allow them to put these into place first, so they can build all the shapes that they want first, just like this. And I'm going to actually make some adjustments here on mine, so that you can see what I'm talking about. And I'm not going to move this just yet, but I'm going to go Control Vertex, and I'm going to select these sections here, and I'm just going to shrink this down a little. And that's it for this, to create this object. But I have this that I want to move it into place after I'm done. So after I put this together, if I look at my outliner, Um, why did that? Oh, 1 second. I hit double click and this opened in 2015. So I'm going to pause this again. Okay, so now I'm back in 2016 extension 2. I had a weird parent issue that was a problem here because I'd opened this in 2015. I'm looking back at this. Everybody who's got a T-post character, you've already built your controls. If I look at my rig group right here and I've got my global setup and I've got my control set, there are no nulls in this object except for this waste null. And this waste null that's here, you can see how this has transformations, but the waste control has no transformations. That's essentially what we're replicating here. For A pose people, I'm going to take my right wrist control and delete it and show you what I'm actually talking about with this. I've built my left wrist control, and I'm going to go under my CVs here like this and make an adjustment to tighten that down so that I get kind of a different shape on this. And then I want to make sure that this works. So given its position, it moves in space. And if I look at this, my alignment for the rotation is correct. So if I hit object on this and then I go to gimbal, it still stays straight up and down and still orients with the object correctly. I'm going to, without moving these into place, duplicate this object, actually group this object to itself, and then duplicate the object and transform Y on these, which you can actually do for all your controls. And then, because I haven't actually created null objects for each of these yet, I can take the group and freeze transformations and delete by type history, so that these pieces are in here, and then rename this so that it's a right control. Now, when I move these out into the group, I've got this in a position. The orientations are still correct, but it's not quite where I want it to be. So I'm going to move it. And I'm going to do that by creating a null group. And so with my left control, I just group it to itself. And I have these two other null groups I can delete. And since I'm working with this group, I'm just going to open this up, copy the name, paste it, and take off control, but call this null. So it's a null group. And now the null group is going to inherit the transformations that I want here. So I'm just going to go ahead and center the pivot, which is fine. And I actually want to move this out so it's here. So that's kind of where I want it. And I'm actually going to insert and move this so that I can align this the way I want exactly, so that my pivot point aligns with this. So that here's where my control is going to rotate from. And then I also, from this group, want to kind of move it down a little so that it fits around the arm a little bit more. So this is my shape for my control. And you can see I have a translate here, and I have some rotations here as well. And I'm actually going to rotate that out just a little bit more. And I have my IK, FK controls on this, but my actual control doesn't. I'm not going to freeze transformations on my null here, but what I am going to do is create another null for this. So I'm going to group this to itself, copy the name here, and call this one null. And then I'm going to look and rotate these based on these positions. So this is a -10. If I watch this, it was rotated based on a centered pivot first. So I'm actually just going to move this out where I think it's going to be. Yeah, my translates, that's actually what's first, which was here. 4.36. So I'm going to take a look at this. And my null here, I'm going to move that out, but I'm going to move it in a negative 4.36. So now it's exactly where I want it to be. And now I can adjust my rotations based on what is here. So I rotated my y 2.81. I'm going to just copy that. And was that my y or my x? That was my y. Move that down. And you can see that that had a slight rotation. And then the last one here is my z. And on this one, I'm going to do the same. And this rotated up because it's negative. But on this side, just take that out, and that gives me the orientation that I want. If I look at this null, I want to make sure that this rotation, which is 2.81, if I go negative, it's going forward. If I go back here and I look at this direction and I go negative, if I go positive, it's going forward. So this one also needs to be a negative. And that's the actual position for my hands. Now my hand positions for my nulls are in the exact position that I want them, which is great. My translate Y and visibility and all of these positions, all of my channel box controls, I can hit, and this time now I can do lock and hide selected. So these are there, but my controls actually work. And now I've created my nulls, but I have full control over my objects, and they maintain their orientation. So does this make sense for everybody? So, and then I'll move my pivot point for my wrist right here on this actual control. And that's the last thing you need to do for your controls. So it's not on the null object that I'm making this adjustment. It is on the control itself. So that snaps to that wrist joint. For each of your other controls, it's the same thing. You set them up in your T-pose here, but you'll need to adjust them to match the angles of your actual rig. So you create your null object. You mirror them over first as a group, and then create your null object. Open up the null object, copy the name, and then paste the name, but change control to null. And then move that however you would like so that it doesn't inherit the transformations of the other object. And then that's it. Any questions on this? Yes?
It's pretty confusing.
How so? What do you need?
So like the transformations, so we only put transformations on the null group.
On the null group. Not on your control.
Right. So we don't, so should we create like the, for the wrist, create the cube, but put a null group first to move it in place?
Create your cube and put it kind of where you want, but not on the hand. So you put it here, but you don't rotate it at all.
Okay.
So you can translate it and freeze transformations for your translation so it's in the right origin position here. So like as you create the cube like this, I can move it however I want here. So here's this cube and I put it together. If my hand's down here, I just put it in here, but I'm not going to rotate it. When I'm done and I've redrawn my cube piece, or even if it's this control and I've moved it around, it's in position. If this is approximately where I want it at my hand, then I can freeze transformations. So freeze my transformations, keeps my position here. Then I null group that so that the group, modify center pivot, will inherit the transforms to line up with my hand. So, and once that's done, then I can just lock this null group. And if I want to adjust this slightly a little bit more, any of this position information that's here is on the null. It is not on the cube. So if I rotate my cube, my rotations stay the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's what you're doing. So I'm going to save, I'm going to go through and do this so that when we come back, all my controls have null groups. You guys should do the same. Go through and make null groups for your controls. mirrored the controls first because we haven't moved them. And then, so we built our controls in the namespace without any rotations on them. And then mirrored those, then created null groups and rotated them into position. And if we needed to move them a little bit more using the translates, that's fine. And then when you're done, you take your null groups and you take all of the objects here that are in position and you simply lock and hide selected. That's it. So that this is what has your controls driven on them, so that when you grab them, this is all that you've got.
You lock and hide so that you're selecting the control, not the null group.
Yeah. So that you can't actually select these or move them or do anything to them ever. So we lock and hide their attributes and their channels so that we can't do anything to them. But we still can with these. And the other reason that we want to do that is like, if you move an object and you key it, and then you move it to another position and you key it, if you don't have a null group in there to maintain the orientation of your original rotations, that object is going to inherit rotations and kind of go all over the place. And that's going to cause a problem. So doing this will fix that problem so your hands don't go flipping all over the place. Okay? I'm going to save this now. You guys can go ahead.